And now, aviation weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, now with your Alaska aviation weather outlook as we go through Wednesday leading up to Thanksgiving Day. Starting as of this Tuesday, we've had a strong but weakening low that's moved up into the Gulf. It was the system that brought the heavy snows, heavy rainfall, storm force to even some hurricane force wind gust, landslide around Wrangell. Remnants of that system will be just this trough along the northern Gulf Coast with areas of IFR, inner coastal mountains and areas, say, from around Skagway on up toward Chilkoot White Pass, and then down from Yakutat westward to Prince William Sound. Much of the interior, though, still seeing VFR conditions thanks to a ridge of high pressure, though, that will begin to weaken. The air mass not quite as cold in areas here over the interior as it was earlier in the week. And then we have a broad area of IFR conditions Wednesday morning across the Aleutians. There'll be a low pressure system that's going to work its way up into the eastern Aleutians as we go through time. And generally a broad southeasterly, southerly moist flow of milder air coming up in along the Gulf Coast. This is going to provide a mixed variety of precipitation. And so as a result, we have another little frontal wave work its way up along the Alaska Peninsula into the western, southwestern part of the Gulf. That's why we see an expansion of IFR conditions across the lower Gulf, the western Gulf, and then in through the entrance of Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, upper parts of the Alaska Peninsula, and then extending back out into the Bering Sea all the way towards St. Paul, and then covering much of the Aleutian chain. For Thursday morning, we see IFR conditions rather extensive along the Gulf Coast, outer Panhandle, Yakutat, back through Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, and even some areas of IFR up on the south side of the Alaska Range, and also down along Shelikof Strait, extending out into the Aleutians and especially the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. And Thursday afternoon, maybe not quite as extensive IFR left in the Panhandle, and VFR conditions expected up into the northern Gulf, with IFR conditions remaining out over the western Gulf, back down along the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, and then back in through areas of the central Aleutians and central Bering Sea. Looking at pass conditions, Anaktuvuk Pass on Wednesday will generally see VFR conditions. It's been cold up that way with generally clear to partly cloudy skies. Same thing, Adigan Pass in through the central Brooks Range VFR. And then as we drop further south and west, remember that band of moisture coming in ahead of that next frontal push in that southeast to south milder moist flow of air. We'll see maybe a little VFR early. Lake Clark and Merrill becoming IFR, though, during the day. Rainy Pass VFR conditions early becoming MVFR on Wednesday, and then Windy Pass MVFR, especially the southern half of the pass down into the south entrance, trying to become VFR for a brief time. Isabel and further east to Mentasta Pass along the Alaska Range will generally see VFR conditions across a good part of the upper Copper River Basin. As we get a little further south and west, Tanita should generally be MVFR, flirting right along the border of MVFR, VFR, especially on the north side of the pass. And then as we get further south toward the Gulf, we anticipate IFR conditions throughout Prince William Sound and especially the eastern half of Portage Pass in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. And then finally, Chilkoot and White will see IFR conditions become MVFR as we go through Wednesday. And looking at freezing levels, first, the surface freezing line runs from the northern Bering along the southwest coast to toward the entrance of Cook Inlet, and then along the northern Gulf Coast in through the inner channels of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft, there's just a little bump up here along the Arctic coast between Nuiqsut and Kaktovik. 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing levels aloft. And then back out here, we find freezing levels rising back up above 4,000 feet here as we run out the Alaska Peninsula into the eastern Aleutians, with higher freezing levels, 6,000 to 8,000 feet as we get down into the North Pacific. And the threat of icing will be notable as this southeast to south push of moist, milder air works its way northward. We expect the potential for icing above 4,000 feet by Wednesday afternoon over areas of Cook Inlet and extending out into the western Gulf. As we go further back toward the southwest, above 8,000 feet here toward the eastern Aleutians, and then above 6,000 feet way out toward the central Aleutians, with that area of low pressure eventually working its way up across the eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula by the time we get to Thanksgiving Day. Now, looking at what we have for just the winds aloft on Wednesday, upper level jet stream, a bit of a ridge here at 30,000 feet, a couple of jet cores to over 100 knots here along the British Columbia coast, and then entering the southern southwestern Gulf, we find winds of 90 to 105 knots. And then we have a circulation here around an area of high pressure bringing stronger winds up along the Kamchatka coastline. But as we drop down to 9,000 feet, we find a broad belt of winds coming in aloft from the south-southwest out into the Gulf and coming up to the Alaska range, and we find pockets of wind at least 40 to as high as 55, even 60 knots. Further back toward the west, here's that low circulation, and as that drifts slowly to the northeast, we find on the backside winds turn to the northeast to north across the western part of the Aleutians, and then bringing it down to 3,000 feet, we find a pretty decent belt of winds coming up into the Gulf from the North Pacific at 60 to 70 knots. Along that remnant trough line as what was left of the strong low that brought the storm to the Panhandle, we still have some winds upwards of 50 to 65 knots, even here toward Prince William Sound. And then as we go up, there's another pocket of winds 45 to 55 knots approaching areas of the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. And the greatest threat for turbulence then on Wednesday will be along areas of the northern Gulf in through Prince William Sound and into the Kenai Peninsula, areas of Cook Inlet extending southwestward through the entrance of Cook Inlet, Shelikof Strait, and then again also back down along areas of the lower Alaska Peninsula, eastern and central Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet, but the bulk of it surface to 5,000 feet here across areas of the western, northwestern Gulf and Cook Inlet, and then as we get up around areas of the Alaska Range, surface to 10,000 feet. There could be some moderate turbulence.